What would you do if the people you trusted most tried to erase you from their lives? I was left blindfolded, humiliated, and abandoned, but I turned their cruelty into my freedom. This is the story of betrayal, resilience, and a life reclaimed against all odds. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the soft hum of suburbia at night, but the deliberate, hollow quiet that made every creak of the floorboard sound like an accusation. I was blindfolded, yet acutely aware of the backyard air clinging to my skin, smelling faintly of freshly cut grass and the remnants of last night's bourbon. Laughter floated from somewhere ahead, sharp and careless, slicing through the darkness like knives. My pulse sped, each beat echoing in my ears louder than their voices. Almost there, someone whispered, "Emmett, my husband," though I barely recognized him in this moment of cruel theater. His hand on the back of my neck was warm, familiar, yet it carried the weight of betrayal. I felt the edges of the rough silk scarf tied across my eyes, the knot pressing into my skin. I could hear Finn and Luca behind him, voices teasing, the casual cruelty of men who thought power meant domination over someone who once trusted them. I took a deliberate breath, tasting it, holding on to it, memorizing the sensation of life before fear fully consumed me. They thought this was a joke, a harmless prank, but I had already made the calculations, counted the seconds until I could act. The silence between their laughs was mine to fill with strategy, each step measured as they guided me toward the car. Gravel crunched beneath my feet, a soundtrack of inevitability, and the scent of dust and gasoline teased the edge of my panic. Inside the car, the world narrowed to the feel of leather against my thighs and the faint scent of Emmett's cologne, a smell I had once associated with home, now tainted by betrayal. "Ready for the best birthday surprise of your life?" His voice, once comforting, now trembled with expectation and arrogance. I nodded. Ready, yes, but not for the joke they imagined. Minutes stretched, elongated by the blindfold and the pounding of my heart. They laughed at their cleverness, unaware of how much control they had already relinquished. My hands found the hidden pocket inside my jacket, emergency cash, a burner phone, keys. Small things, but they were enough. Enough to tilt the scales. Enough to remind me I had a life outside the carefully constructed illusion they had trapped me in. The car stopped. Gravel again, but now the air smelled different, stale, abandoned, industrial. Route 16's old gas station, shuttered and forgotten, waited like a stage set for humiliation. They pushed me out, their grip firm but not forceful, as if they were handing me a script I was meant to perform. I allowed myself a stumble, a silent acknowledgement of the role they thought I would play. Then I stood, chest forward, shoulders back, imagining the image they would see, a woman broken, bewildered, pliable, the blindfold lifted. The station loomed, windows shattered, paint peeling like old memories. "Surprise!" they shouted, voices ricocheting off the empty concrete, the mockery tangible. I smiled faintly, and it wasn't confusion, just acknowledgement. I understood fully now what they had planned, not a birthday prank, but a test, a ritual of erasure, and yet I did not tremble. The first decision of many crystallized in that moment. I would not be erased. My eyes scanned the desolation, memorized the angles, the shadows, the exits. This gas station, this moment, would not define me. It would mark my beginning. The car doors slammed, engines roared, and dust swirled like ghosts of my old life. Alone, I breathed in deeply, tasting the liberation that comes not from escape alone, but from choosing escape on your own terms. My hands went to the hidden boot where cash waited. I changed, discarded the remnants of their narrative, and prepared to step into a world I had only dared imagine. The first step off the gravel was heavy with possibility. Not fear. Not despair. Possibility. This was no longer their story. It was mine. The wind carried the faint hum of Route 16 into the hollowed silence of the abandoned gas station. I stayed crouched behind the rusted fuel pumps, letting my eyes adjust, the scarlet scarf still dangling from my wrist. My heart pounded not from fear this time, but from the fierce clarity of purpose. Every laugh, every careless word Emmett and his friends had thrown like daggers, sharpened my resolve. I had been invisible for too long. Now, I was nothing but focused. I unrolled the small bundle of cash hidden in my boot, emergency funds I'd meticulously stashed over months. $800. Enough for a cab, a bus, a ticket to the airport, and the start of a life built entirely on my terms. I checked the burner phone, the screen glowing faintly in the waning sunlight. Messages from unknown numbers and old emails were all ignored. I couldn't risk leaving a trail. Not for Emmett, not for anyone. 3 years of silent endurance had taught me the art of invisibility. And now, invisibility would be my weapon. Time passed slowly, measured only by the occasional car that kicked up dust on the distant road. I rehearsed my exit, visualizing every step, from hiding behind the gas pumps to slipping into the sedan I'd prearranged with an Uber driver, from there to the bus station, then New York, then the unknown. Each step felt like an incision, cutting the old life away piece by piece. The air tasted of grit and gasoline and freedom, strange companions for the first breaths of a new life. Memories of the past clawed at me. The smiles I'd given, the dinners cooked, the company parties endured, none of it real. Not a single word of gratitude, not a single glance of respect. Phoebe's name hovered in my mind like a toxic shadow, every email, every hotel confirmation I had unearthed now etched into my consciousness. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was surgical, calculated, and systemic. But beneath the sting, beneath the simmering anger, I felt something unexpected: empowerment. The realization that for the first time, I was truly free. A vehicle's headlights pierced the dimming dusk. My prearranged Uber. I slipped into the shadows, letting the hum of the approaching engine mask my movements. The driver's face was cautious, alert, but his eyes softened when I confirmed my destination with a calm, measured voice. Route 16, behind the gas station. Promptly at noon, I said, handing over a bit of extra cash. The car slowed, then stopped just far enough for me to appear as a phantom materializing from the shadows. As the sedan pulled away, I let my fingers brush over the scarf tied to my wrist, feeling its coarse silk and imagining it as a symbol. Not of humiliation, but of liberation. Every thread was a reminder that control had shifted. I could feel the weight of years, decades, even lifting. The sky above was bruised purple and gold, and I realized the beauty of it for the first time in years. Freedom wasn't just a concept, it was the air filling my lungs, the crunch of gravel under my boots, the hum of an engine carrying me away. By the time we reached the bus station, night had fallen. I watched the city lights shimmer in the distance, the anonymity of the crowd shielding me, the bustle of life folding around my escape. I purchased my ticket carefully, deliberately choosing the seat in the corner, facing away from potential recognition. Every small decision reinforced my autonomy. This was no longer about running, it was about reclaiming. Sitting in the shadowed corner of the bus station, waiting for the overnight coach to New York, I allowed myself a moment of stillness. The adrenaline that had carried me this far ebbed, leaving in its wake a profound quiet. For the first time, I felt the absence of fear not as emptiness, but as space to think, to plan, to imagine. 3 years of betrayal, humiliation, and silence had forged me into someone new. Someone capable of seeing the path forward and walking it alone. As the bus rolled into view, its headlights cutting through the night, I rose, straightened my jacket, and let the scarf slide from my wrist. The old life ended here. The new one was waiting, just over the horizon. The bus hummed along the empty highway, its headlights slicing through the dark, and with each passing mile, the weight of the past began to lift, but not entirely. I had escaped Emmett, Phoebe, and the life that had nearly suffocated me, yet a quiet unease settled in my chest. Freedom was intoxicating, yes, but also terrifying. For the first time in years, there was no safety net. No familiar streets, no shared home, no routines that masked the truth. Every decision from here on would be mine, and mine alone. By dawn, the skyline of New York spread like a jagged heartbeat against the pale morning sky. I watched through the tinted window, the city alive with possibility and threat alike. The streets smelled of exhaust, coffee, and ambition, a perfume entirely foreign to me. I was small against this vastness, invisible once again, but this time, Invisibility felt like armor instead of erasure. At the bus terminal, I clutched my backpack, a few essentials, and the small amount of cash I had salvaged from the pawned jewelry. My heart tightened when I remembered Mr. Marston's gun, tucked in a hidden compartment of my bag. It was absurdly heavy, yet reassuring, proof that I could survive if necessary. The next steps were mapped but not guaranteed: a cab to the airport, a flight to Paris, anonymity, reinvention. Each move required courage I wasn't certain I possessed. Inside the cab, the driver kept the meter running and the radio low, but every turn down narrow streets felt like a challenge, a reminder that I could slip from this fragile plan with a single wrong move. My fingers danced nervously over the straps of my backpack, tracing the edges of the cash roll inside. I couldn't help thinking of Emmett's face, frozen in disbelief at my disappearance. What would it feel like to know he had no power over me? Not yet. That satisfaction would come later. At the airport, I blended into the crowd, careful to avoid eye contact, careful to avoid leaving a trace. Each step was deliberate, measured, as though the ground itself might betray me. The boarding gate loomed ahead, a portal to the unknown. I could almost hear Emmett laughing behind me, imagining my humiliation, and for a fleeting moment, the old fear threatened to rise. But I clenched my jaw, forcing it down. No. Fear had lost. Hours later, I was airborne, clouds passing below like pale rivers of light. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, a woman no longer defined by betrayal, but by choices her own, made in quiet determination. And then the first real test hit, the turbulence. Not the plane, not the clouds, but the realization that leaving was only the beginning. Paris awaited, but I had no job, no connections, no language skills beyond the basics. For the first time, survival required ingenuity, not just courage. I had escaped one cage only to face another, invisible yet formidable. Landing in Charles de Gaulle, the city unfolded like a puzzle I had to solve, signs in French, conversations I only half understood, streets buzzing with lives I didn't yet share. I moved quickly, efficiently, heading toward the hostel I had reserved under my maiden name. The small, narrow building smelled of old wood and dust, but it was mine for the night. My dormitory bed, thin and squeaky, was a stark contrast to the suburban comforts I'd abandoned. Yet I sank onto it with a sense of exhilaration. I was truly free. By evening, exhaustion settled into my bones, but a spark of ambition stirred. I dug through my backpack, reviewing pamphlets from local employment agencies, scanning classifieds with a ruthless eye. Administrative work, receptionist positions, anything that would allow me to exist without being traced. Then I paused at one listing: Lambert Financial, Paris. An international company, English-speaking clients. Entry-level, yes, but it was an opening, a foothold. My fingers hovered over the phone, dialing cautiously. The line clicked, and a crisp French-accented English voice answered. I introduced myself as Isabella Chin, careful, composed. The receptionist's tone was neutral, almost dismissive, but I felt a flicker of hope when she scheduled me for an interview the following morning. It wasn't a promise of success, only a chance, but in that moment, it felt like the first real decision I had made entirely for myself. That night, lying in my narrow bed, Paris outside my window, I allowed myself a single thought. The world had not ended with my disappearance, it had expanded. Every fear, every betrayal, every scar from the past was now fuel. I would not just survive. I would rise. Tomorrow, my real life would begin. The morning air in Montmartre was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fresh bread from the boulangerie below my hostel. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed the folds of my modest blouse, reminding myself that this wasn't a vacation. This was the first step into a life that demanded competence, courage, and patience. Every decision from here would ripple outward, shaping the person I was becoming. The Lambert Financial office was a short walk from the hostel, cobblestone streets vibrating under my boots. I passed small cafes and art galleries, the city alive with life that felt both exhilarating and foreign. Inside the building, the receptionist greeted me with a polite nod, barely acknowledging my presence. I took a deep breath, focusing on what mattered: professionalism, composure, precision. Bonjour, Isabella Chin? The voice was crisp, controlled. Madame Rousseau, my interviewer, stood with a notebook in hand, her eyes appraising me like a chess player measuring her opponent. Follow me, s'il vous plaît. Each step through the office felt weighted, the hum of conversation punctuated by clicks of keyboards and murmured client names. I reminded myself, in this room, I was not the abandoned wife, not the pawned woman. I was a professional, a force quietly asserting herself. The interview began with routine questions: experience, skills, languages. My answers were precise, measured, revealing enough competence to impress, but little of my turbulent past. Madame Rousseau's sharp gaze softened slightly when I spoke about adaptability, about navigating complex situations without prior guidance. It was the truth. I had survived chaos. I had learned to adapt. Halfway through, she leaned back and studied me. "You are not like the others," she said in English, the accent thick but understandable. "You see patterns where others see numbers." Her words, simple as they were, landed heavily. Recognition, not pity, validation for the instincts that had kept me alive these past months. The office buzzed as I was escorted to my new desk. A small cubicle, a fortress of polished wood, awaiting the intrusion of unfamiliar clients and documents. I unpacked a notebook and a pen, arranging them deliberately, the act grounding me. But the sense of calm was fleeting. As I began sifting through reports, reviewing investment files, I felt the familiar pang. The past had not entirely loosened its grip. Each spreadsheet, each financial anomaly reminded me that the world outside Paris could be cruel, unpredictable, and invasive. By mid-afternoon, I was lost in numbers, analyzing client portfolios, when a sudden vibration in my pocket made my heart skip. A notification, an email from the United States, from a familiar domain, one I had long avoided. My pulse quickened despite myself. I did not open it immediately. I refused to allow the ghosts of a past life to intrude so soon. Yet curiosity gnawed at me. Slowly, deliberately, I unlocked the phone. It was a project inquiry for Reynolds Construction. My stomach tightened. My past, Emmett, betrayal, abandonment, was reaching across oceans, threatening to drag me back into a life I had fought to leave behind. I read the message, scanning the details, my mind racing. The company was in financial trouble, seeking investment. The familiar dread clawed at me, a bitter reminder that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. I shut the phone, taking a deep breath. I could ignore it, stay in the cocoon of Paris, continue building this fragile new identity. But a part of me, scarred, determined, unyielding, whispered that closure could only come on my terms. That the past might knock, but it did not get to define me. When I returned to my desk, Madame Rousseau appeared, observing my sudden intensity. "Everything all right, Mademoiselle Chin?" Her tone was casual, but her gaze was sharp. I smiled tightly. "Just a client update," I replied, careful to keep my voice steady. As the day drew on, the shadows in my cubicle lengthened, mirroring the tension coiling in my chest. Paris was mine, but so was the choice of whether to confront the past or retreat into safety. I had been invisible once, abandoned, discarded, but invisibility no longer held appeal. This time, I would face the storm on my terms, and so, as twilight fell over the city, the stage was set. Isabella Chin, no longer just a survivor, was preparing to step fully into power, intellect, and agency. But the storm was coming, and whether she would master it or be swept away remained to be seen. The conference room at Atlantic Meridian's New York office glimmered with glass and steel, a stage set high above the city. And Isabella stood at its head like a conductor before an orchestra, her laptop open but untouched, her body taut with a calm that had taken years to build. She had dressed for this moment in a slate-gray suit sharp enough to slice the air. Her hair swept back from her face so nothing hid the eyes of the woman he once tried to erase. The door opened and she heard it before she saw him, the weight of his shoes on the marble, the small tremor in his voice as he greeted the receptionist, and then Emmett Reynolds stepped into view. The man who had left her in a hotel room with nothing but shame and silence, who had signed the papers that turned her into a ghost. Tanner stood at her right, a still and quiet presence radiating steadiness, his hand grazing the edge of the table, anchoring her to now. Emmett blinked hard, his pupils flaring with disbelief, as if his own reflection had leapt from a mirror to accuse him. His lips parted, but no sound came. Isabella gave him a smile so controlled it was almost tender, a smile built on 12 years of surviving humiliation and rewriting herself, and she slid a folder across the table with fingers that didn't shake. "Your proposal," she said, her voice a low current of power. "We've reviewed it. The debt-to-asset ratio is unsustainable. These overseas contracts have no signatures." She saw the papers tremble in his hands. Marcus, his advisor, began some rote explanation, but Emmett didn't hear him. His eyes were locked on hers, panic blooming beneath his tailored composure, and in that silence Isabella felt the old room return, the hotel with its heavy curtains, the heat of betrayal. Her knees pressed against cold tile as she gasped for air. And then it was gone because she wasn't that woman anymore. You disappeared," he whispered, his voice a torn scrap of cloth. "Police, investigation. We thought." "I left," Isabella said, the words clean and exact, each one a stone placed on a grave. "Because you left me first. Because you and Phoebe planned my humiliation and my erasure as if I were disposable. I deserved better." The sentence didn't tremble, it rang. Emmett's face slackened, his jaw working helplessly, some part of him struggling to recognize the woman in front of him, some part realizing she had built an empire from the ashes he'd left behind. Tanner's hand drifted nearer to hers without touching it, a silent promise that she wasn't alone this time. Around them, the city flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, headlights and glass towers reflecting like broken stars, and Isabella felt her pulse steady in a way it never had before. This was not vengeance for its own sake, it was reclamation. The rewriting of a narrative she'd been forced to live. For the first time in years she felt taller than him, taller than the past, the room echoing not with apology or pleading, but with the sound of his stunned breathing, the silence of his defeat. The elevator doors closed on the last echo of Emmett's disbelief, leaving Isabella alone with Tanner and the quiet hum of the city beneath them, and in that stillness she felt something that had eluded her for years, a profound, unshakable freedom, the kind that does not announce itself with fireworks or vindictive gestures, but with the simple, relentless truth of survival and self-possession. She turned from the glass wall, watching the streets below swell and shrink like living veins, and realized how far she had traveled, not just in distance, across oceans and time zones, but inside herself, from the hollow ache of betrayal to the steady pulse of purpose. Tanner's hand found hers, warm and grounding, yet she did not need it to know she was whole. It was a choice, not a necessity, and that was what made it exquisite. In her mind, the abandoned gas station, the whispered schemes, the stolen birthdays, all existed now as ghosts, impotent and distant, while the woman she had become thrived in their absence. She thought of Paris streets, of hostile windows filtering morning light over her first small triumphs, of boardrooms trembling under her counsel, of her own reflection sharpening in mirrors that no longer reflected shame but resolve. Somewhere across the world, Emmett could still wonder at her survival, but she felt no spark of revenge, only a deep, resonant calm, the quiet knowledge that the story he wrote for her had been rewritten entirely, page by page, by her own hand. And as night fell over the city, casting a soft silver glow across rooftops and rivers, Isabella lifted her gaze to the sky, inhaled the electric air of possibility, and smiled, because she had not just escaped the past. She had arrived in a life she had built herself, unbound, unbroken, and gloriously, irrevocably free. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing the moment that inspired you most. Join a community of survivors and thrivers. Your voice matters.